Welcome to another broadcast from mindyourhealthcast.com. As usual, we are bringing you information, primarily provocative information sometimes that you think is totally off the wall probably until you go look it up. As I always do, I am provoking you to go and find out for yourself. And the reason I'm doing that is because I feel that this information is so important for your health and welfare that I want you to prove me wrong, and you probably could somewhere, and that's fine. I am in a constant state of learning. I have been for many, many years. I have nothing that I consider to be rock solid that I believe that with new evidence couldn't be changed or modified in some way. And I'm looking for as close to truth as you can get. I know that's a rather nebulous term sometimes, what is absolute truth, but we want you to at least acquaint yourself with the latest findings, and which is not always accurate. Sometimes old findings are more accurate and later findings come along, and then it ends up that the old was better to begin with, and that happens a lot of times. Now, we are continuing. This is part 3 of our discussion on hypertension, and I want you to remember that hypertension is not a disease. Not a disease. It's a symptom of some type of disturbance in your body, whether physically or emotionally. Something is amiss, and hence this is a symptom that can develop as a result of that. Medicine, of course, classifies everything they give a name to as a disease and leads you to believe that you have been attacked by hypertension, and therefore you need to have the right bullet to shoot Mr. Hypertension out of your body. Well, it doesn't quite work like that, but it sounds simple and easy. You know, you're attacked by some monster. We bring in the Ghostbusters. They shoot out the monster in some way, and everything is fine, and you walk away and live happily ever after. It sounds good as a simplistic paradigm, but of course in fact it's far from being true. Not the way the world works, not the way we work, and it sometimes is difficult to back away because it's so simple and easy. And it's nice if everything were that way. A bug attacks you, you kill the bug, everything is fine. There are so many thousands of things in between those steps that it isn't funny, and of course, unless someone is inclined to want to get heavily into biochemistry and physiology and pathology and all of those things, it would be difficult to know the steps. But it's really not difficult to create the right conditions that one can be reasonably healthy. And that's what we provoke you to look into. We offer you suggestions, and if you find those to be true, you will probably, in most cases, find yourself being healthier than before. Now, with this blood pressure thing, we're back again, as I've said over and over. Medicine treats pictures and numbers. They don't treat people. Excuse me. A very good example. Some of the latest recommendations related to blood pressure and cardiovascular, and they have a joint national committee on prevention, detection, evaluation, and treatment of high blood pressure, or referred to as JNC for short. And for many years you've been told that 120 over 80 is normal. And so they have provided medications that inhibit certain signals to the vascular system, in particular the arterial system. They inhibit that so that you relax the vessel more and hence reduce the pressure. Now, interestingly, it seems very simplistic, but on the other hand, why you were increasing pressure is not dealt with. Just take this drug that inhibits this signal to the arteries, and regardless of what is triggering that signal, we won't worry about that. So basically, it's another case of treating numbers and symptoms, and sometimes no symptoms, because, as I say, 120/80 has been considered normal for a long time. But now here's the new guidelines. Normal is less than 120. Diastolic is less than 80. Okay, so if you're 119 and 79, you are normal. If you're 120 and 80, you are now not normal. You are pre-hypertension. Now, what does that mean? Well, just to be safe, we probably should put you on a light medication to kind of move it down a little. Now, I am convinced that the whole idea of numbers and pictures has developed to sell drugs. So every time you want to increase your sales of, in this case, hypertensives, of which now there's about 100 on the market, what do? You lower the number. And then when someone goes to their local doctor, instead of taking 3 pressure readings, especially if it's high or a little high, or now who knows how, how high is high, they're going to prescribe you some type of medication and get you on to the merry-go-round of hypertensive medications. So bit by bit, over time, of course, since they haven't dealt with whatever is behind the whole thing, you are going to, guess what? Go up more, and therefore they're going to push down more. And so we get on the seesaw of the blood pressure medications. And of course, every medication, inasmuch as it's an inhibitor of some sort, it is going to create other issues. Because when you take a drug, now you have to remember how drugs work. There are drugs that are called agonists, and there are drugs that are called antagonists. An antagonist is a drug that locks onto a receptor site that pushes something down or blocks something or inhibits something. An agonist is something that locks onto a receptor site and pushes things upward. So you have agonists and antagonists. And so in this case, we're talking about calcium channel blockers, one of the big medications. So what is it? It is a blocker. It blocks a signal. It's in a sense, it's an antagonist. It turns something down or off. And we have beta blockers. Okay. Now we've got a blocker that turns off a beta neurological signal. And those go to a lot of different places. They just don't only go to the arterial muscle. They go to other places. And, of course, then there is the ACE inhibitor, which is the third of the big prescribed drugs. And the ACE inhibitor blocks or inhibits an enzyme that can trigger arterial contraction, but it involves the lungs. And so a lot of times when people take that drug, they start getting this cough that they can't get rid of because of the interference with factors going on in the lungs. And then later they've come up with one that instead of blocking or inhibiting the enzyme, the ACE enzyme, this one locks onto the actual ACE receptor sites and inhibits it at that level. Now, all of these medications carry with them significant other effects. Now, a guy said many years ago that the term side effects is a term that was invented by Wall Street to minimize the other major effects that a drug gives you in your body. When they're wanting to target one symptom, you're paying a price in other areas. And so instead of calling this, well, you know, it's causing a major problem with this, this, and this, we'll call it side effects. Now, of course, having your throat swell and your tongue swell and your breathing inhibited and several other factors or symptoms related to a major allergic reaction, like an anaphylactic shock, I would call that more than just a side effect. Or ones that cause blood clots, heart attacks, strokes, and death. I don't think I'd call that a side effect. I think I would call that a major effect. I think I'd rather have burny eyes and drippy nose than to have a blood clot, heart attack, stroke, or death. I think I'll take the drippy nose. And so they're played down. And so the average public person, in my mind, hears that, but they don't hear it. In other words, this is going to keep my eyes from burning and my nose from dripping, and I can go out and have a good time and everything will be great. Until you drop over dead. Well, then it's not quite so great. But that's not a side effect. That is a major adverse effect because drugs either, as I say, shut down or overstimulate. And so here we've got stage 1 hypertension. Now, pre-hypertension is starting at 120/80. So you go in and they run your blood pressure and they say, 120/80, wow, I'm doing good. No. You're already in pre-hypertension. We need to give you some medication. And then stage 1 actually is 140/90. Now you're getting serious. And then stage 2 is greater than 160 or greater than 100 on the diastolic. So, again, as I say, it's a numbers game. So the higher the number, the more powerful and more of the hypertensive drugs. So you could end up on having 2, 3, 4, 5 hypertensive drugs. Now, again, nothing in this regimen has anything to do with the cause of why there is a hypertensive condition. And as I say, most doctors, if you go in and you get a reading of 150/90, they're going to immediately prescribe you a drug. They're not going to take the pressure and then leave you there undisturbed for a period of time and then take a second reading and then allow you to stay there for another period of time and take a third reading, because the true way to do it, if you have an elevated reading because of the anxiety created when someone goes to a doctor's office, which of course they call the white coat syndrome, requires that you take 3 pressure readings considerably separated so that the body has a chance to accommodate to that and to settle down. In many cases it will come back down and you leave and you won't get the prescription. But in the doctor's mind, they're thinking, well, they're probably going to have a problem anyhow, so we'll just go ahead and get them started on their blood pressure medication, which of course is for the rest of your life, such as it is, and I'm convinced that the medications are going to shorten the life in the long run. Now, there's so many reasons why you have elevated blood pressure, and sometimes it's a combination of all of those. Sometimes it's a familial thing. You may find that in a certain family, the blood pressure tends to run high, same as maybe the cholesterol runs very high, and that it's not pathological to that person. It's genetic, and it is not a problem. Now, you're going to get the drug regardless, as long as the numbers are up, because as I say, medicine treats numbers, they don't treat people. Okay, so now I talked before about the causes and some of the things you can do. Well, first of all, I mentioned one of the major players has to do, well, I'll mention the three: the nutritional aspects, poisons in the body, and mental, emotional, or stress factors. Those are usually the three major players. Okay, now, we started talking about nutrition, and nutrition is important. I don't care what your body does. If you're exposed to a virus, if you pick up some kind of poison in your body, the people whose bodies are able to cope with it are the people who are well nutritioned. That means they have the right nutrients in their body that the body can function the way it's supposed to. It can trigger an immune response, and it may trigger an emotional response too, but it can trigger an immune response, which generates antibody capability and phagocytic capability, and or existing antibodies to specific types of antigens. And that doesn't happen if your body doesn't have what it needs to work right. Now, so I mentioned before that we need high quality food, and that food has to be nutritionally dense and toxin free. Two big factors. Okay? Nutritionally dense means it was grown in soil that was high in minerals and cofactors that allow your plant to absorb those minerals, chelate them and absorb them out of the soil, utilize what are needed within the plant, and when you eat the plant, you get those chelated minerals into your body that are in a high energy state that your body can make use of, because nothing happens without enzymes, and enzymes don't work without cofactors, which are minerals. And minerals have to be high in energy. We've touched on that a little. I think it's probably hard to wrap your head around. But those minerals have to have high energy. And as that energy is dissipated in the body, as it's working under certain conditions as a cofactor, it's like they are a jumper of energy that causes a response or a reaction to take place. If you have an enzyme that's breaking something apart, like a complex protein down into peptides, it requires a cofactor for that enzyme to provide that extra energy surge to split that apart. Or if you're putting things together, some enzymes put things together. The same way you need those cofactors, which are minerals. Now, we also, of course, need minerals in the structure, in particular the bone, but big time, we need the minerals to carry on our functions. Now, minerals cannot be made by the body. As far as I know, I find no evidence anywhere that if you were never taking in any minerals, that your body could build them. Now, there is some evidence if you have good energetic minerals in your body, but you happen to be deficient in certain key ones, that the body has the capability by cold fusion to actually generate a different element out of two lower elements, or more maybe, but at least two. And that's called biological transmutation. There's been a big study on it. It looks pretty solid to me from all the information I've been able to find. In fact, it defies logic to think that something could happen if you didn't have the capability of biological transmutation. But it appears at this point we don't have the capability of building minerals from nothing. I'm open to it. If we can find a way to do it, it's fine with me. But at this point, we have to have minerals. They have to be high energy minerals, which means they have been grown in the right soil. And without the minerals, other things don't happen. So you need to pay attention to what you're eating and get the right thing in. Now, it also needs to be free of toxins. Toxins such as various fertilizing chemicals and pesticides and herbicides, which are sprayed a lot to make it easy and fast to grow and take care of growing plants without having to put in a lot of man hours to maintain it. So if you spray a weed killer in there and get rid of the weeds, you don't have to what they used to call harrow it. You don't have to go through and hoe out the weeds or pull the weeds or in some way manage the weeds. You just spray on a weed killer. Now, of course, you can't spray the weed killer without getting it on the plants. And I dare say, because they are a solvent type chemical, they penetrate into the plant, and therefore just washing the plant is not likely to get rid of them. And the same thing with the pesticides. So consequently, it's very important you get the right food. And as I say, the minerals need to be energized minerals, not just minerals, but that's a whole other subject about soil and so forth. But there's ways you can measure the soil and know if it's in a position to contribute the minerals in the form that they should be, so you could get the best use out of it. And another part of the nutrition is that, you know, we've been salt crazy in this society, and we consume huge amounts of salt. And the salt is really not salt. It's a chemical called sodium chloride, which means that sodium molecules and chloride molecules combine together, and hence it has that bitey, sharp taste, because that sodium and chloride both are kind of, in my mind, corrosive. And hence you get a lot of sodium buildup in the body. I think the body can handle the chloride, but unless you pour it in huge amounts. But on the other hand, the sodium in excessive amounts can be problematic. It can reduce the voltage on the red cells in the blood. It becomes a zeta potential inhibitor, and therefore the voltage drop on the surface of red cells causes them to have a clumping effect or stick together. And so that's not good. In fact, a huge case of salt in some cases could lead to a complete systemic coagulation of the blood, and hence death, because the blood can't move through there when it's all in a big clump. And so, but there are salts you can use. I mentioned about the Himalayan salt, the true Himalayan salt. There's unfortunately companies who play on the term or name Himalaya, and it's not true Himalayan salt. The one that comes from the Himalayas, from ancient seabeds before the sea was contaminated, and with high energy before all the energy was drained away. So the interesting thing is that the constituents in Himalayan salt are in the same proportion and of the same type that are in the plasma of human blood, and hence it's very, very compatible. In fact, there's even a therapy called the Quinton therapy, named after a Dr. Quinton, who did all the research and showed that you could actually shoot the plasma salt. You know, in other words, with the same constituency as the human plasma. You could inject it directly into the blood, and it would have actually a therapeutic effect. And you could put it on the skin, and sometimes it'll sink in to a degree, and you could drink it. But it does have a major effect, because if it's the high quality elements that are in that salt, and you take it in your body, it has a lot of good effect. Now, as I mentioned before, and some I'm sure have seen, I have a broadcast called Salt That Heals and Salt That Kills, and it's about the studies done in Germany by a German physician and her friend who was a physicist. They spent years studying all the specifications and the utilization of Himalayan salt in the human body. And it's a tremendous amount of good information, and if you're taking that, you won't have problems with salt and blood pressure. In fact, one of the things they found is if you get on Himalayan salt, it has a tendency to normalize the blood pressure. Now, there's a lot of studies, I've got a pile of them here, New England Journal of Medicine and so forth, about the salt and blood pressure. And I'm not going to get into all of it other than to say, and I'm sure most people have even heard that, about too much salt's not good for blood pressure and or your kidneys. Now, in Chinese medicine, salt is a stimulator of kidneys, but too much salt actually becomes depressive of the kidneys, and hence can cause kidney problems. And sometimes when the kidney's in trouble, it will signal a signal that could raise blood pressure. And of course, the other thing in the basic nutrition is cutting down on all of the carbohydrates. And most of them are junk carbohydrates. And the food pyramid, of course, somebody said it's upside down. They've got too much. A true one would be totally opposite, a true good pyramid. And so they got all this big layer of carbohydrates at the bottom when you pump in huge amounts of grains and carbohydrates, and it creates a lot of trouble that we'll find out more about when we do our program on fatty acids. Even though it's fatty acids, it will touch on with carbohydrates because there's a big connection between the two. And of course, if you want to put a lot of fat on your body, just pour in a lot of carbohydrates, and what the body doesn't use is going to build fat, so it works pretty well. Diets, there's different diets out there, and unfortunately, people are different. I have, for years, for a lot of reasons, which I've covered before, because I have covered blood types in an earlier broadcast. If you look back through the archive, you'll probably find one there on it, because I've mentioned quite a bit about blood types. There is a popular faddish one. There's nothing wrong with the book in terms of understanding why blood type makes a difference. The only problem is that the actual foods that are recommended there, I don't believe, are so good. Now, there's a lot of diets come on the market, and I'm saying all this because usually if you are overweight, one of the things a doctor is going to tell you need to lose weight. And that could help blood pressure, and to a degree that's true, because when you put on more weight, you have to build more blood vessels to carry more blood to the additional weight, which puts more pressure on your heart and more pressure on the arteries, and consequently there is a relationship. And so the diets that are out there are usually developed by somebody who had some problems. They looked around and tried a lot of different things and finally came up with something that worked good for them, and hence they think it should work good for everyone. Now, many, many years ago, and some of you are probably too young to know about it, there was a book came out by a husband and wife by the name of Diamond, D-I-A-M-O-N-D, just like a diamond, and it was called Fit for Life. Now, it was an extremely good diet for vegetarians or type A blood. Type A blood is the one that can be a total vegetarian. So, anyhow, all those people who got on it were A's. They did extremely well, which is about 41% of the populace. But the O's started to get weak and feel bad and sick on the same diet, even though at the beginning they felt a little better, because if you go on a straight vegetarian diet, you'll detox some junk out of your body, and then you'll feel a little better because of that. But then the need for the proteins and the meat and so forth that an O needs, the person begins to get a little pale, a little weak, energy goes down because they're not getting all the things they need for their body to work right. So in that case, there was another diet came out called the Zone Diet, which was a high protein, low carbohydrate diet, just the opposite, because the Fit for Life was high carbohydrate, low protein. And so the type O needs just the opposite. They need a lot more protein and a lot less carbohydrates. Then there was you've heard of the no-fat diet. The guy that that really plugged that in jogging fell dead of a heart attack. And the blood type, as I say, because of the fact we are individualistic, is very important. Now, continuing on the nutritional side, because that's the biggie. If you correct a lot of those things, other things will follow suit. Because now you're going to get rid of deficiencies, and deficiencies cause symptoms and problems, and eventually malfunctions. And so if you can correct the body and you can correct all those things, you'll be in good shape. Now, the other thing is big is the fatty acids, the omega-3s and omega-6s. We don't really have time to get into detail other than to mention that I am going to be doing a big whole program just on omega-3s and omega-6 essential fatty acids and why they're important, and the big scam that you should immediately get off of, because this could make your heart, blood pressure have problems, and that is the current fish oils that are being peddled on the market that have been misrepresented as being omega-3s and omega-6s, which they are not. Now, it's funny because I missed it at the beginning too, so don't feel bad. EPA and DHA, eicosapentaenoic acid and docosahexaenoic acid, are not omega-3s and omega-6s. What they are derivative of omega-3 and omega-6. That means that the fish body created a derivative called eicosapentaenoic acid and a derivative called docosahexaenoic acid from the original omega-3s and omega-6s. Hence, they are not omega-3 or omega-6, they are derivatives. And because of that, they create problems in our body. Now, the interesting thing is, from what can be found out, it looks pretty good and it sounds reasonable to me, cold water fish are very high in these derivatives, and it's their antifreeze which is what keeps them from freezing in freezing water. So at any rate, they're not good, and if you are taking fish oil or any kind of marine oil, shrimp oil, whatever it is, mussel oil, catfish oil, I don't care, it's not good. I would say the sooner you get off of it, the better, and the reason I say that is that if you are taking it, it can affect the brain and impair brain function. It can affect the cardiovascular system and cause big problems, and it can affect the organ functions in the body, and it especially affects the skin, causing the skin to wrinkle and prematurely age, so it's an aging factor. So none of those things most people want, and that was just the surface. It also depresses the immune system and other factors. So some people tout it saying, well, gee, I had psoriasis and I started taking high doses of fish oil and it settled down. Yeah, it can, because it acts like a steroid in the body, so you could do the same thing with prednisone or cortisone, but not desirable because it creates other adverse effects. And what happens when you give high doses of fish oil, it tends to act like a drug in your body. Remember that early drugs came from herbs and natural sources. If you take it and you concentrate it, you can use it as a drug, and it will shut down or overstimulate things in the body, and that's what it does. So I would say the big thing before you find out the real thing you should be doing is right away to get off of the fish oil, because they found it takes at least 18 weeks to flush that stuff out of your body by using good oils once you quit taking it. And why are these fatty acids so important? Because of the cell membranes. The cell membranes in the body are what transport things in and out of the cells and keep the cells intact. And one of the biggies is oxygen. And when you take these fish oils, what do? They build faulty membrane cell walls, and especially the mitochondria inside the cell. And when that happens, it can't transport oxygen in like it should, and guess what? As we'll talk about later, reducing the oxygen inflow into the cell by only 35% less can lead to a conversion of the cell to a malignant cell. I don't think you want that. There is a body matrix system, and we've talked about it a little bit before. I don't have time to cover it, but flushing that out and getting it operating properly. And when we talk about it again, we'll talk about the cycles in the matrix of the body that keeps a lot of the poisons out. And of course, glyconutrients are important. Normally, I think the body makes those if it's working right. But if it doesn't, there are ways to supplement those, which have to do with either functions of the body or structure, and certain ones have something to do with the cell membranes. Okay, the toxins are a biggie problem. You need to clean out your body, and they're poisons that block chemistry. And as I mentioned earlier, I've said many times, there is a book that was published originally way back in 1926 and in some different editions all the way up to 1935 called Toxemia Explained. The revised edition, The True Interpretation of the Cause of Disease and How to Cure, is an obvious sequence. An antidote to fear frenzy and popular mad chasing after so-called cures. Dr. Tilden was an MD and operated out of Denver, Colorado, and he said he 20 years practiced regular medicine, getting poor results, and then the next 30 years of his life he realized what toxemia was and how to take care of it, and consequently had many people then get well. In fact, a high percentage of his people got well if they followed the program, and the idea is to get rid of the toxins. However, getting back to what we said on the nutrition, if you don't have the right nutrients and especially the minerals, your body has trouble doing it. So the viruses and chemicals and metals are the big problem as far as inhibiting factors in the body. There's in pesticides that shut down parts of the mitochondria in the production of energy. There's some that affect the blood cells, or affects the blood cells' ability to pick up oxygen. So there's so many things that these poisons do, and if your body were in good shape, had the right nutrition, in most cases it can take care of itself. And the body has to be nourished, or it's just not going to work right. The other biggie, of course, is the emotional stress factor that we mentioned about. In today's world, it's probably crazy to think that you don't have any stress. Very few people don't have stress. There are some meditators who spend a high percentage of their time in meditation who are probably less stressed, or people who live in certain areas of the country that are away from all of the hustle bustle and stress that leave a more pastoral life, and therefore are less stressed. The problem is that not only is it the external stress, but internal emotional stress that we create of ourselves. Every time we get angry, we create a group of neuropeptides that actually spread through the whole body and are taken up by all the cells of the body. And I'm convinced that in the case of anger, it's going to go to the liver and hence going to affect liver function and so forth. Candace Pert, we've mentioned before, wrote a book called Molecules of Emotion, and goes into it in detail, and she finally says she was convinced that the whole body is the subconscious mind and memory of a person, because these neuropeptides carry that information throughout the body. And I'm convinced that where it concentrates, and that's in the realm of cancer and so forth, or degeneration, that where a group of toxic emotions deposit in the body, that area is in jeopardy of becoming seriously malfunctional and or sick. So the ways to deal with all that, I mentioned meditation. There's more and more books out. It was discovered years ago by Dr. Herbert Benson, who is and was for years, has been for years, a researcher at Harvard on stress and psychosomatic effects. And he wrote a book many years ago when I first met him in New York. He was at a big conference, and he wrote a book on the relaxation response after having studied a lot of meditators when it first became popular in this country, especially what they called Zen meditation. He found that it's possible to trigger a relaxation response in the body in a very simplistic way, and he talks about it in his book, The Relaxation Response, and he's written a couple of books since then that you might want to read. As far as I know, they're probably all on my website in the shopping cart of books, and very good book. Now, there is a program done by Heart Math, and if you go in my website, there's a banner under health tools and so forth called Heart Math. You click that, and they'll take you to some of the training things that you can do very inexpensively to calm your body down and get things settled down. Remember, too much emotional and or stress, irritation of the body releases excess cortisol from the adrenals, and if it releases adrenaline, it causes the arteries to tighten up, and if too much cortisol, it inflames the arterial walls, hence leading to damage, hence leading to plaque buildup, and it also can lead to brain malfunction. Also, excessive cortisol, which is a type of steroid. So, it's important that we learn to handle all of that. And there are other ways. There's biofeedback, which means you're hooked up to an instrument that tells you when you're very relaxed, and you train your mind on your requests to calm the body down. And Heart Math has a little small pocket unit you carry with you. If you're feeling really uptight, you can put your thumb on it, and it will lead you back down to a more relaxed state. And it has a little screen that gives you a picture of the heartbeat, and whether it's coherent or incoherent. When you're in a very calm, centered state of mind and emotion, you get a nice, smooth, coherent heartbeat. When you're stressed, distressed, you have an over-triggering of the sympathetic system. You get erratic micro-arrhythmias going on, out of sync, out of coherence in the heart, which leads to issues with the heart and the cardiovascular system. There are some sound light machines that are not very expensive on my site. There's one called Mind Spa that you wear glasses that have special lights made from LEDs, and you close your eyes and it triggers through the optic centers in the brain relaxation and visualization along with sound, and or you can play special music through the same unit because it also has earphones and you listen to it in sync with the lights. There's all kind of combinations for study, concentration, for memory, for just relaxation in general, for creativity, learning a language. I mean, there's all kinds of ways it can be used. They're not real expensive, and they're extremely good to deal with that emotional side. The other big factor is the body's electricity. The electricity in the body is like a battery. We have protons which have a positive charge, and we have electrons which have a negative charge. We have movement through the body of electrons, which is called electricity, and we have movement of protons through the body, which is called proticity. We're more inclined to get out of our food the protons, but we're less likely to get the electrons. And a deficiency of electrons can lead to a lot of malfunctions, including the electrical charge on the red cells, as we mentioned earlier, called the zeta potential, which keeps the blood cells apart and working properly. There's an electropotential across the cell membranes and the mitochondrial membranes that require electrons and proton movement to make things work. There's a whole group of things, way beyond what we have time to cover now, about bioelectronic Vincent. We've mentioned it before, which measures protons, electrons, and ions in the body, which really makes it a battery. You've got an electrolyte, which are ions that carry electrons, and you've also got protons and electrons. So the three of those in the fluids of the body, there's a way of measuring to know the status of the body. And it's not extremely difficult to do. It's been developed and proven over years in Europe, in France, in Germany, Austria, Switzerland, a lot of places that it's been shown to be factual. I've worked with it a lot over the years. But the fact is, you're less inclined to have protons because if you're eating oxidized food, that means it's missing electrons. And so it's easier to lose an electron than it is a proton, and hence the body can become unbalanced in electrons. And even though you would think everything's okay, the energy production is not possible to the level it should be without the electrons. And as I say, the membrane doesn't work right if you don't have this electropotential across the membrane, which is going to require electrons. And so the Germans, when I studied there, told me about something they called grounding, which has to do with the fact that the Earth contains a huge amount of electrons, and you notice that when you see a streak of lightning. A streak of lightning is a big movement of electrons. And the potential between clouds and Earth, there's this back and forth ionization of the air so that it can act like a conductor, ion, and it can move electrons back and forth between the Earth and the clouds, and hence you get a big streak of lightning. So the Germans said, if you can go out and go barefoot in the grass while the dew is still on it, you can pull electrons from the Earth into your body. Now, the only downside of that is, especially in a lot of areas anymore, they use so much chemicals on the lawns and so forth that unless you're way out in the country someplace, that is not as easy to do. So, some very astute people, in fact, the Germans mentioned it, is that you can use a diode hooked up in the right way to your body that will actually allow you to be grounded and hence pull electrons through a ground connection into your body. And as I said, it was originally called grounding. Now they're calling it earthing. And there's a lot of information written about it. I just ran across a big article called Earthing Grounding the Human Body Reduces Blood Viscosity, a Major Factor in Cardiovascular Disease. And getting back to this blood pressure thing that we're talking about, the hypertension, having the proper amount of electrons in itself has certain major effects in the body. So this is a big article, the Journal of Alternative and Complementary Medicine, published in 2012. And what happens is, if you go to my website, on the shopping cart, you'll find a click for a book and a pad, I like a kit, that goes at the foot of your bed. It's a conductive sheet or pad, and you sleep with your feet on it, and that connects through, if you're in an apartment or a house, through the ground of the electrical circuit into the ground to pull electrons. Now, when they put in a meter box in your house, there's one ground that grounds everything into the ground so that you don't get shocks and all kinds of things. And so that is that third little hole in the outlet. And so this kit has a thing to measure to make sure you're getting a ground connection okay with it. And then you can go to the ground, or you can run a wire out and drive a metal stake in the ground and connect it directly to the ground. But bringing those electrons into the body, especially if you do it in bed while you sleep, has a relaxing and recharging effect on your body system. And several of my patients have gotten them, and they work very well. So that is, especially I think if you're eating a poor diet and the food is oxidized, meaning missing electrons, which pretty much a lot of it is today, and people who don't eat a good diet are especially in bad shape. It's one way you can help the body to rebuild the proton-electron balance or the battery capability, which is one of the reasons why things work or don't work, is if the battery has enough charge. Okay, we've thrown enough things at you. Now, there are people in natural medicine who still think like the medical model, even though they're using natural things. And so what do? They want to give you an herb that lowers the blood pressure, or they want to in some way deal with blood pressure. Now, unfortunately, you're forced to use the terms that medicine has established when you're talking to people, because otherwise they have no idea what you're talking about until you take enough time to explain. So sometimes we talk about hypertension, but I also have to educate them that hypertension is not a disease. Something is going on in your body that needs balance, and when you take the right therapy and the right diet, you're going to remove the poisons and you're going to get the body back into balance. And hence, over years, we found that people's blood pressure came down, not because we were trying to force it down. Now, it's true, if you take certain herbs and in large doses, it can act as an inhibitor and be just like a drug, but then you're doing allopathic medicine. Now, it's true, it may not be quite as toxic, but you still aren't solving the problem. So if you really want to get rid of the hypertension, you've got to go back and deal with the problems. Now, I mentioned about the salt, and I didn't mention the book. I better tell you again. The book is called Water and Salt, that goes into all these studies and how to utilize the information they found out about Himalayan salt. I've been using it for a long time. I think it's very good, and in light of our stressful society and our deficient food, it does give you some of those key elements. As I said, it actually tends to lower blood pressure, as opposed to regular table salt, which isn't really salt, raises blood pressure. This tends to level it out. And in this book, you'll see all kinds of things they found out over the years as they investigated the function and use of true Himalayan salt in the body. So I guess we've given you enough to wrestle with. I'm not sure that we gave whoever was thinking about hypertension that asked that I do a broadcast on it, and it's certainly not the way that you might get from a lot of people even in the natural health field. Now, we didn't touch on cholesterol. but we know that it is a problem of stress, and it's not the way it's sold, and the drugs that they give create another pile of problems to try to force the liver cells to quit producing cholesterol when it's needed by the body. That's why it's produced. And the higher the stress, the higher the cholesterol. The stress is the problem, and the stress is going to create that cardiovascular problems, and the stress is going to cause the body to break down faster, and hence more cholesterol needed to rebuild it and repair it. So I'm hoping, and I keep coming back to try to give you a big picture to see that all this is interconnected. It's not that we have a body and suddenly some chink gets in there, and when I say a chink, like a cinder or a piece of dirt or something, and that's your problem. One day somebody brought me a little book in my office, and it had this little fuzzy, hairy, ugly looking thing, and then there's all these different scenarios where that's there. And I still remember the one, the car is in the car garage and the mechanic has the hood up, and here's one of those little hairy things in where the engine is, and he said, now there's your problem. Those things are issues, but a properly nutritioned and a properly immunized, meaning from the body's immune capability, not vaccinations, but if it's properly immunized, I don't know if it's even a word, but it sounds good. If you have those in proper balance, then all these extraneous things rarely are a major problem. And sometime we'll talk about epidemics and what happens. We've alluded to them now and then, and we'll probably do a big broadcast just on that. There's some new stuff coming out now about vaccinations, and I am going to do an update because finally the CDC has admitted via whistleblowers, a couple of whistleblowers, that they've known for years that MMR vaccine had a direct relationship with autism, and especially in young black males. They've known it, but they altered the report claiming there was no effect. And from what the whistleblower information is, the person there, the lady in charge who told everybody, keep your mouth shut, don't ever talk about it, left the CDC and took a very lucrative job with the company who makes MMR. So we'll probably do an update because it's terrible what has been happening, and it's not going to get better, but probably worse as more vaccines are developed. So that's another upcoming one. Other than that, we've taken all of your time. I hope you get something useful out of this broadcast, and we'll be looking forward to doing the big one on the omega-3s and omega-6s coming up shortly. Until then, go to our website, mindyourhealthcast.com, and be healthy.